By the early 2000s, law enforcement in British Columbia was confronting a pattern that had become increasingly difficult to ignore. South Asian men, many of them young and from the same communities, were being killed in a cycle of targeted violence that stretched across the Lower Mainland. The numbers alone were staggering. By that point, more than 80 Indo-Canadian men had already been killed since 1993. The names changed, the locations shifted, but the pattern remained. One of the figures who would eventually emerge from that environment was Gurmit Singh Dhak. Gurmit Singh Dhak was a central figure in the British Columbia gang landscape. As the co-leader of the Dhak Dure group, he sat at the epicenter of drug trafficking and high-stakes violence in the Lower Mainland. Despite his reputation, Dhak spent his final months attempting to broker truces between factions in British Columbia. To understand how he became involved in that world, it is necessary to begin much earlier, inside a very different setting. Gurmit Singh Dhak was born in 1978 to first-generation Punjabi immigrant parents who had established themselves in the Vancouver area. His family owned and operated a laundromat, a business that reflected a familiar trajectory among immigrant households working to build stability in a new country. They lived in Vancouver's Dunbar neighborhood, an area on the city's west side not typically associated with organized crime, but rather for its working and middle-class families. He was not an isolated case in that regard. Many individuals who would later become associated with gang activity in British Columbia came from similar backgrounds, families that had immigrated, established businesses, and sought upward mobility. The Lower Mainland in the 1990s was expanding, with increasing opportunities in construction, trade work, small business, and post-secondary education. Alongside that growth came new economic opportunities, but also emerging tensions. During this period, law enforcement began to observe an increase in youth involvement in organized criminal activity, particularly within drug markets connected to marijuana production and distribution. They were tied to cross-border networks, with product moving between British Columbia and the United States. Competition over these markets intensified, and with that competition came violence. Shootings were carried out in residential areas. Targets were often young men, and the violence, once contained, began to spill into public view. Over time, these conflicts resulted in a significant number of deaths. The combination of accessible drug markets, existing networks, and an environment shaped by visible violence created conditions in which involvement in criminal activity became, for some, an available path. For those who were growing up in British Columbia, exposure to this lifestyle was difficult to ignore. By the time Gurmit Singh Dhak reached adulthood, this landscape was already established. As a teenager, Dhak became associated with a group known as Billy's Crew, a small, loosely organized high school gang operating in Vancouver's South Slope area. The group was not considered a major criminal organization. These were not yet the large-scale operations that would later define organized crime in the region, but they were often the starting point. What made groups like Billy's Crew significant was not their size or immediate impact, but the era in which they existed. At the time, gang violence was escalating across Canada. British Columbia was among the provinces experiencing a sharp rise in youth gang activity, prompting the launch of multiple public hotlines aimed at helping at-risk young people before they became entrenched in the lifestyle. During this period, certain elements of criminal life, particularly those tied to drug trafficking, were becoming more visible within parts of the community. Displays of wealth, including expensive vehicles, clothing, and cash, were increasingly associated with individuals involved in those activities. For young people observing this from the outside, the contrast could be striking. On one side, traditional expectations centered mostly around education. On the other, there appeared to be a faster path, one that offered immediate financial reward but carried significant risk. At the same time, high-profile figures were shaping public perception of that world. One of the most visible was Bindi Johal, whose media presence and involvement in violent conflicts during the mid-1990s received significant attention. Coverage of these events extended beyond the individuals directly involved. It contributed to a broader awareness of gang activity and in some cases, influenced how criminal success was perceived by younger audiences. The environment in which Dhak was coming of age was one in which figures like Johal were widely known. Dhak even attended the same school as Bindi, Sir Charles Tupper Secondary School in Vancouver. It's been said that Gurmit Singh Dhak's exposure to the criminal world began around this stage in his life. According to investigative accounts, that exposure can be traced back to his early teenage years, around the time he was in grade 8. It was then that he encountered an individual who would leave a lasting impression. Raymond Ray Chan, a figure associated with Vancouver's Lotus Gang, Chan reportedly carried himself with the kind of visibility and status that stood out to teenagers growing up in Vancouver during the 1990s gang era. He drove a red Porsche Carrera, wore expensive clothes, and projected an image of wealth and influence that contrasted sharply with the ordinary routines of school life. For a young teenager, the message was unmistakable. The car, the money, and the attention surrounding figures like Chan and Bindi represented a version of success that appeared obtainable. Chan would occasionally arrive near Dhak's school, pulling up in the sports car that had already become part of his reputation on the street. According to reports, Chan recruited Dhak into drug distribution, presenting it not simply as work, but as a pathway, promising him access to the same lifestyle, including luxury vehicles, status, and attention from women. By the time Dhak reached high school, that promise had, at least on the surface, materialized. He was said to be earning significant amounts of money through drug sales. He had access to the kind of lifestyle that had first drawn his attention: vehicles, cash, and the outward markers of success that came with it. As the years went on, Dhak had made himself known to police as a significant figure within British Columbia's drug trade. This eventually opened the door to gangs. He was later quoted saying, "Once you start selling drugs, you are going to get into the gangster lifestyle." We see the first blueprint of this in Dhak's own youth. While still a teenager, he was arrested for extortion. The arrest was carried out by Detective Doug Spencer, who at the time was investigating youth gang activity connected to emerging Indo-Canadian networks. For Gurmit Singh Dhak, his early arrest marked more than a single incident. It represented a point of entry. As Dhak moved beyond low-level offenses, the nature of his involvement began to change. The activities were no longer limited to intimidation or minor group conflicts. They were becoming more deliberate, more organized, and more violent. In February 1999, Dhak allegedly assisted with helping one of his associates kill a 19-year-old rival. During the incident, he was reportedly behind the wheel of the vehicle, slowing it down to allow an accomplice to open fire on a rival gang member. It was said Dhak lowered his window of the car to allow the shooter to open fire. The incident happened outside of Madison's nightclub in Vancouver. The shooter was later convicted of second-degree murder. As part of the investigation of the incident, Dhak was caught in possession of a gun that had allegedly been used in another gang-related shooting in December 1998. In April 2003, Dhak was convicted in a plea bargain of manslaughter for the 1999 killing and was sentenced to 7 years in prison. 1 month later, in a quiet industrial park in Richmond, the body of Raymond Chan was discovered. He had been shot dead, a brutal, unceremonious end for a man who had once allegedly commanded the Lotus Gang. At the time of Chan's death, Gurmit Dhak was already behind bars, serving time in a correctional institution. For the public, it was another statistic in a violent drug trade. But for Gurmit Singh Dhak, the news hit with the force of a physical blow. Raymond Chan wasn't just a business associate. He was the man who had first taught a teenage Dhak the ropes of the lifestyle, helping convince him with the flash of a red Porsche. His death shattered the illusion of invincibility. While serving time in custody, Dhak reached out to a familiar figure, police officer Doug Spencer, who had encountered him years earlier during his first arrest. According to Spencer, while Dhak was still in custody, he asked him to speak to his younger brother about getting out of the lifestyle. He told him, "I'm in too far. I have too many enemies." For Gurmit, the murder of Chan provided a rare moment of clarity. an acknowledgement that the path he had taken was no longer reversible. And if it was too late for him, he wanted to attempt to steer his brother away from the same path. In 2004, Dhak was released on parole, but freedom in this context did not mean safety. Because, as investigators have repeatedly noted, participation in targeted violence changes how an individual is perceived. It places them on a different level within the hierarchy, and it also places them in a different category of risk. Shortly after his release, Constable Doug Spencer met with him again, but this time it was to deliver a warning. Intelligence suggested that members of Mara Salvatrucha had arrived in Vancouver with a specific objective: to kill him. According to Spencer, he calmly replied, "I know. Thanks for telling me, Doug. They've been here for 2 weeks." Only months later, in 2005, Dhak's Lexus SUV was shot multiple times outside the Uranus Lounge on East Broadway in Vancouver. He survived, but when police attempted to investigate, Dhak refused to cooperate. He declined to provide information and, according to reports, threatened one of the responding officers, resulting in his arrest. Despite this, Constable Douglas Spencer of the Vancouver Police Department said his experience with him was the opposite. He was quoted saying, "He was never disrespectful. He would shoot the breeze. You couldn't imagine that he was a stone-cold killer." In conversations with journalist Kim Bolan of the Vancouver Sun, Spencer offered a more detailed assessment. He described Dhak as someone whose focus, at least outwardly, was not conflict but profit. His attitude was make money, not war, said Spencer. It was a distinction that mattered. In a city increasingly defined by retaliation and public violence, Spencer characterized Dhak as operating differently, more aligned with what he referred to as an old-school approach. He described Dhak as well-respected within that environment, someone who, in his view, avoided unnecessary conflict and did not provoke situations that could escalate into violence. He was an anomaly. None of them are like that now, he added. But this is where the contradiction becomes unavoidable. The record surrounding his activities tells a more complex story. For investigators, this duality is not unusual. In Dhak's case, the distinction between perception and reality would become increasingly difficult to separate. Over time, the Dhak-Dure alliance began to take shape. At the center of this group was the 3 Dure brothers, Sandip Singh Dure, Balraj Singh Dure, and Paul Singh Dure. By this time, Gurmit's younger brother Sukh had also got involved. Individually, they had already been connected to criminal activity within the Lower Mainland, but together, according to investigative accounts, they represented something that became far more coordinated. They were a major Indo-Canadian crime faction in the province. By 2007, Gurmit Singh Dhak was not unknown to police. His name had appeared in connection with multiple investigations over the years. Court records show convictions for assault and possession of cocaine for the purpose of trafficking. By 2004 and 2005, British Columbia was being marketed to the world as one of Canada's most desirable places to live, a province defined by mountain skylines, luxury developments, and a booming economy. But beneath that image, the violence connected to the drug trade was becoming increasingly difficult to contain. On weekend nights, gunfire had become increasingly common. Police were responding to multiple incidents involving firearms within days of each other, and in some cases within hours. On September 8, 2007, the violence had spilled into one of Vancouver's busiest spaces, bringing the realities of the gang war directly into public view. Quattro on 4th is one of Vancouver's most elite dining destinations, a place where the city's affluent gather for quiet celebrations. On this night, Gurmit Dhak was among them, hosting a birthday party at a window-side table. The atmosphere was curated, posh, and secure, or so it seemed. The glass didn't shatter until 2 masked gunmen marched up to the exterior window. They didn't enter the restaurant. They didn't need to. They opened fire directly through the pane, turning a high-end dinner into a bloody crime scene in a matter of seconds. Both Gurmit Dhak and his 21-year-old girlfriend were hit in the volley of lead. As the gunmen fled into the Vancouver night, the victims were rushed to the hospital. Gurmit was hit in the back, causing serious abdominal injuries. His girlfriend was struck multiple times in the leg. She would later require several surgeries before being released from hospital. Despite the brazen nature of the attack, an attempt on his life, and the wounding of his partner, Gurmit Dhak maintained the ironclad law of the underworld. As detectives stood by his hospital bed looking for names, descriptions, or motives, Dhak gave them nothing. He refused to answer a single question. This was the influence in its purest form. Even with his own blood on the floor of a Kitsilano bistro, Dhak stayed silent. But silence in the face of an assassination attempt isn't peace. It's a placeholder for retaliation. The Quattro shooting did not occur in isolation. Just 1 month earlier, on August 9th, 2 gunmen had entered the Fortune Happiness restaurant in Vancouver's Mount Pleasant neighborhood, killing 2 people and injuring 6 others. No arrests were made in that case. At the time, members of the Vancouver Police Department were already raising concerns publicly. Constable Tim Fanning described the frequency of incidents in stark terms. He stated that officers were encountering firearms on a near-daily basis, and on weekends, multiple gun-related incidents, sometimes as many as 5, were no longer unusual. After surviving the attempt on his life at Quattro on 4th, Gurmit Dhak moved his operations and his life to Burnaby, a city that is located 20 minutes east of Vancouver. In the final year of his life, Gurmit Singh Dhak began to confront the reality of the life he had spent years building. At some point in 2010, Dhak made contact with a youth outreach unit known as the Odd Squad. Dhak decided to participate in the creation of an anti-gang video intended for high school students. For investigators familiar with his history, the decision stood out. It suggested that, at least in some capacity, he was attempting to denounce the gang lifestyle he had long been associated with. According to veteran gang investigator Doug Spencer, he approached Dhak while delivering the formal warning about intelligence connected to the possible hit on his life. At first, Dhak refused to participate in an interview, but roughly a week later, he changed his mind and called Spencer back, agreeing to speak publicly for the first time about the reality behind the gang lifestyle. The video was recorded in June of 2010. He described the outward appearance of a gangster, the confidence, the aggression, the visible displays of status, as something that actually masked a deeper instability. He explained that living the life meant existing in a constant state of uncertainty, describing a reality defined by fear of being betrayed, and fear of not knowing where the next threat might come from. It was a life, he suggested, where trust was limited and often temporary, and where the possibility of violence was never distant. In his own words, the experience of being a gangster was not one of power, but one of sustained vigilance, where every movement carried risk and every relationship required caution. But the most cynical part of this dynamic, as Dhak noted, occurs the moment the prison gates swing open for your release. He claimed that the same individuals who ignored your existence for years are suddenly waiting at the curb, ready to perform a grotesque imitation of loyalty. They forget about you, they don't come visit you, they don't put money in your account. Once you go in, everybody forgets about you until you come back out, and that's when they're going to use you again, he explained. Dhak peeled back the skin of the celebrity gangster lifestyle. He didn't talk about the jewelry, the clubs, or the perceived power. He spoke of a crushing, suffocating paranoia. During the on-camera interview, he was quoted saying, "Every day, I've got to look over my shoulder. If I jump out of my car, am I going to get shot? I don't know." He described a life that wasn't lived, but merely endured. The interview provided a chilling first-hand testimony that would later become a staple of BC classrooms. He spent his last months trying to warn the next generation that the Brotherhood of the Lower Mainland is nothing but a hollow promise. Research from Simon Fraser University calls the impact of these tapes startling. Dhak's final wish was for a bleaker education on the reality of this life. He wanted the next generation to know that beneath the surface, every boss is just a man waking up, wondering if the sun is rising for the last time. And just a few months later, that's exactly what would happen for Gurmit Singh Dhak. On the evening of October 16, 2010, in the parking lot of Burnaby's Metropolis at Metrotown, Gurmit Singh Dhak's day came to an abrupt and violent end. The Metrotown Mall is alive with the usual Saturday rhythm: families, weekend shoppers, and the white noise of a city in motion. Among them is Gurmit Singh Dhak. To the province's Integrated Gang Task Force, Dhak is a high-level target, a name synonymous with the Dhak Dure crime syndicate. That day, Dhak had arranged to meet an associate, Jujhar Kunkun, in the parking area near the Sears store. It was early evening, just before 6 o'clock, and the lot, while active, was not at peak congestion. Shoppers moved through the concourses of the department store, oblivious to the fact that a professional execution was about to unfold just meters away in the parking lot. At approximately 5:50 p.m., Dhak was seated alone inside his black BMW SUV. A gunman emerges. A hail of gunfire follows. Dhak was struck by a fatal shot to the face while seated inside the vehicle. The attack was swift and deliberate, leaving no opportunity for response. At the same time, his associate Jujhar Kunkun was also targeted. He sustained critical gunshot injuries, but survived after being transported to hospital. Within minutes, the scene was secured by local authorities and homicide investigators. They quickly began preserving evidence and gathering surveillance footage from the shopping complex. In the aftermath of the shooting, the chaos that had erupted in the Metrotown parking lot quickly gave way to silence. Gurmit Dhak's black BMW SUV remained parked near the Sears entrance, surrounded by police tape as investigators moved through the scene photographing the vehicle. The BMW, now at the center of one of British Columbia's most high-profile gang killings, was eventually loaded onto a tow truck and removed from the parking lot for forensic examination. The shooters had successfully navigated the busiest shopping hub in the province, executed a high-profile target, and dissolved into the Vancouver night without leaving a trace. At the time of the shooting, law enforcement agencies were already aware of rising tensions within the Lower Mainland's gang landscape. Units such as the Combined Forces Special Enforcement Unit had been monitoring individuals connected to ongoing conflicts. Images believed to show firearms recovered at the scene have circulated online over the years, though police have never publicly confirmed the specific weapons used in the killing. The murder of Gurmit Dhak didn't bring peace. It was the trigger of a chapter of violence even bloodier than the one that preceded it. But his interview remains the most honest piece of evidence in the history of BC's gang wars. In hindsight, the interview no longer feels like a simple anti-gang message. It was a warning from someone deeply connected to British Columbia's gang conflict. Dhak had survived shootings, prison sentences, police investigations, and years of escalating violence. His killing became one of the defining gangland executions of that era. When speaking on the death of Gurmit Dhak, veteran crime reporter Kim Bolan wrote that she hoped his message would reach young people before they entered the same world that ultimately consumed him. But the story did not end with him. The shootings and funerals continued, and new names slowly took the place of the old ones. For investigators and families who have watched this violence unfold for decades, that may be the most unsettling reality of all. Thank you for watching. This video examined the life, death, and final warning of Gurmit Singh Dhak and the continuing cycle of gang violence across British Columbia. This video is for educational and documentary purposes only. All information presented is based on publicly available reporting, court records, archived media coverage, and statements made by law enforcement or individuals involved. No allegations beyond publicly documented information are being made.